This is the Hope Not Note podcast,
where we answer your questions and share inspirational stories to fill your soul with hope.
Our mission is to empower hope to those who have been plagued by note.
I'm Dr. Dylan Caswell.
And I'm Brandy.
And we're here to bring you out of the note and into hope.
Welcome to the Hope Not Note podcast. How's it going?
Great.
It's
always going great.
Yes. We are in football season, which we absolutely love. And our question is about football. Are you excited?
I'm so excited for that.
Football.
Let's go.
This is from a listener named Bo. And he asks, I was watching a Cleveland Browns game. Go Brownies. And noticed.
Go Chiefs, but go Browns.
And notice
Brandy now. So sorry. Brandy is a Cleveland Browns fan, but now officially has more Chiefs gear than Browns gear.
But that's only because I've never bought anything Chiefs. It's only because you are getting so big and strong, so you keep growing out of your clothes, so that I just get the hand me down. So does that count?
It counts because they're yours now.
Okay.
Go Chiefs.
But if you lose weight, will you take them back?
Potentially.
Okay. All right, the question. I was watching a Cleveland Browns game and noticed one of the players wearing a guardian cap. Mm-hmm. Do guardian caps prevent head injuries or concussions?
Bo, great question. If you're wondering what a guardian cap is, you've seen some players wear it. There's 6 NFL players that have worn it so far at the time of this recording in the 2024 season. Mm-hmm. But they are all mandated to wear them in training camp. So if you haven't seen it on the field in live play, you may have seen pictures in training camp. And it's basically these like helmets on top of the helmet. It's like these paddings that still have the team logos, but they go on outside of the helmet, which make the helmet look bigger. And they're called a guardian cap. So to answer the question, was it decrease the concussion rate, or was it just head injury?
Both. Does it prevent head injuries?
Does it prevent head injuries and concussions? Okay. Because it is difficult to parse them apart because they can be separated or they can be similar. So we'll go with concussion because like a head injury could be a skull fracture.
Oh, sure.
Or something to that nature, where a concussion is more of like a brain injury, but it's the head.
Okay, so we'll stick with concussion.
So we'll stick with concussion. I'll try to talk a little bit on impact forces, skull fractures, things like that. So to answer this first, I want to go to the source of the information, which is Guardian, the company that owns the Guardian cap.
Oh, I thought you meant like the Cleveland baseball team.
The Cleveland baseball team.
I was like,
because the Browns, the Guardians, I see.
Yes.
Yeah, so typically when we see a company that is marketing their product, the Guardian cap, they will make a lot of false claims. They'll say things like, the Guardian cap is incredibly effective at preventing concussions. All NFL teams are using them, so this is why your youth athletes should be using them. And shout out to Guardian, because that is not what they put on their website.
Wow.
Their website, they specifically make this claim that no helmet or helmet pad can prevent head injuries while playing sports. They also go on to say that research has not reached agreement on the role of head impact forces and concussions, which is very true. And we'll dive into that a little bit. But they go on to say that the Guardian cap might reduce the magnitude of the impact during a tackle. And then my favorite part is at the end, they say, this is one small piece to the puzzle. Wow.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to dive into this because, one, for a company to say that on their website is like incredibly shocking. It reminds me when we did the hydrogen water episode, and like all the companies basically just like kind of lie.
Right.
And so to see that like the Guardian website is being completely transparent
100%.
about like, well, I mean, that like serves the people the best, right? Is like this transparency.
Right. Yeah, because they're saying like, hey, we have this thing that's being used, but like there's still a lot of research that needs to be done before we can make any claims of this. And to say that like we are one piece of the puzzle, like to have a product and take a step back and say there's a lot of other things happening and we're a small piece of that, like, man, like I didn't know much about Guardian, the company before Guardian caps, but like just from reading that on their website, the same thing, like we're watching games, seeing the Guardian caps, and like working in that area, we need to know this stuff. Like people, like Bo has this question, but thousands of other people have this question.
Right. And I could see parents being like, every youth athlete should only be wearing Guardian cap helmets.
Right.
Until they're in college or something like that, and like making these claims, but the reality is like that may not even be the case, right?
Right. And it's just refreshing to see a company just like know where they're at, know what they provide, but to have that insight and be like to me, that's almost even better marketing. But that's because of like a science background, not a consumer customer type of approach.
Well, and just like the value, like you value truth and research versus like you don't easily get played by stuff, right?
Yeah.
And like the reality is like some people do.
Yeah, and the reality is like Guardian could super play everybody. Like think of the money they would make if every youth football team, every high school team was mandated to wear these caps.
Yeah.
They could retire. They could make these one-time ship out, sell the company, be done with it.
Yeah.
And instead they're like, yeah, no, we don't really know yet. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
But we do see that some players are wearing them in games. And they're, I do think it's admirable of all the steps that are being taken to make the game safer. And I think any effort towards that is worthwhile. And I remember back a while ago, I went to a conference and the head MD, Alan Sills was there and presenting and just sharing all the things that they're doing to try to bring down the rate of concussions.
In the NFL,
in the NFL.
The head MD in the NFL.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a very interesting presentation because it kind of pulled back the curtain a little bit and showed us the work that was being done. And I do think like people can have a perception that like the NFL is a money making business, so they don't care about the players. I think previously there was a lot of things in the game that needed to be changed. And a lot of those things have been changed. And whether it's the player union or whether it's them saying like, hey, we do want to protect these guys long term, but like, stuff is being done. And that's awesome.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a little too late for some previous players and the stuff that they went through.
Sure.
But
you could say that for a lot of things more than just like concussions though.
Right. And kind of like a lot of the risk before was the players weren't necessarily educated on the risk of playing the sport. And now the risk is known. And if you choose to do it, like that's on you, but they're still trying to make the game much safer. They went down to the point of looking at the rubber that is put into the turf and seeing if they use different types of rubber, would that impact the head forces to potentially decrease the rate of head injury or concussion? It didn't. But like the fact that they looked into that was cool.
Well, that's where research should go rather than like we were talking about a book that is studying like the shrimps like eyesight or something like that. And it's like, why is research going into that versus like this stuff? So I love to hear that there's like intentional research for the safety of like humanity.
Right. And to make the game safer and it's incredible. So the Guardian cap is one of those efforts. Maybe this thing can decrease the rate. Maybe it doesn't, but let's make an effort to see what happens, right? And typically what happens is like these products come out and then after they come out, then the research is further done. Like they're doing research in-house to see what they come up with. Then it goes on the market. And then as it gets more popular, then other independent bodies start going, okay, let's look at this without a bias.
So what have like other independent parties seen so far?
Yeah. So it's interesting because like Guardian cap and Guardian, they're saying, hey, like we don't necessarily know what it will do to prevent concussions, but we do think it can decrease the magnitude of a head impact. Thinking that with like the Guardian, the force of it, that it can be dispersed more because of the cap that's on there. So it's interesting because how does research look at the impact and the magnitude of it spreading around the helmet Well, one way they do it is that they just drop the helmet on a force platform. And they drop it from the same height at the same speed, but they do different angles of the helmet to see, does the front of the helmet take more force? Does the side take more? How does the guardian cap disperse this around the helmet? So they drop regular helmets and they drop helmets with the guardian cap on, and they look at the forces, and nobody's in the helmet. Like, they're not dropping a person in the helmet down onto their head.
Like...
It's just the helmet just hitting down into the platform.
Is there a mannequin in the helmet?
No, it's just the
helmet.
Just the helmet. Gotcha. Just the helmet going down. And in those studies, they found that with the guardian cap on, there was no difference in dispersing the forces across the helmet. No difference compared to the guardian cap being on the helmet or being off the helmet. Now, that's one study that's just looking at the impact of dropping a helmet when there's two people colliding. It's a little bit different.
Of course.
Right? So that's kind of where the research starts, is like, the claim is that it disperses the forces. So let's see if it disperses the forces in the most controlled environment that it can, right? So that's why they're dropping these helmets on the force platform and seeing. But imagine that research study. Like, you're a grad student and like you're helping out with this research and like, all right, I need you to go stand above this platform and drop the helmet.
I was wondering if it was going to be a person or if they had like, I don't even know, but like a platform that opened up. Yeah. Or something like that. But I mean, I don't know if they would disclose that information.
So they would put that in the method section. And I didn't read specifically into that, into incredible detail. I learned there's a force platform, they're dropping the helmet, same height, same speed. Sure. To standardize it, honestly, my guess would be that like they probably had a clamp of like a robot, hit a button, and then it let go of it.
That's okay. So that makes sense.
So maybe the student was retrieving the helmet after it hit the force platform and bringing it back up. But again, that study showed no difference in the magnitude. And again, that's in the most controlled environment.
Okay.
Does it change when there's impact happening? This is really hard to study because in the example of a concussion, the brain moves differently than the skull. And the helmet can move differently than the skull, which can move differently than the brain. So if you attach sensors to the helmet, it doesn't give you clear data on what's happening at the head. Because for a concussion to happen, there's a coup counter coup that needs to happen, which means that the skull kind of goes forward, the brain shifts back, and then the skull comes back and the brain goes forward. And the concussion is from the brain in that getting a shear injury to the neural networks within the brain. So there has to be that to happen. Gotcha. For the concussion. So when we look at impact forces and a sensor attached to the helmet, it doesn't give you that data. So what they've done, which I think is very sophisticated, is they've put data markers, or sensors is a better term, in mouthpieces. So then the mouthpiece, granted the player has to wear the mouthpiece, and there is a learning curve when you're using the instrumented mouthpiece that you can't chew on it or it messes with the sensor. So you have to be educated on how to wear the mouthpiece, and then you have to actually wear it in a game. But there was research looking at D1 collegiate football players that had the mouthpiece in, had the guardian cap on, had the mouthpiece in, didn't have the guardian cap on. So now we're getting a better idea of these rotation and linear accelerations that can happen at the brain that could lead potentially to a concussion, because the mouthpiece moves with the skull and where that's moving versus the helmet.
Interesting.
So it gives a little bit better insight into it. It's not great, but it's better than the sensors in the helmet. So what they found when people were wearing the mouthpieces and taking different types of impact, like they didn't set up the impact of like, I want you to get crushed in the side of your head and then the front of your head and this side of your head. They just watched them through practice.
Okay.
And what they found is that the magnitude didn't change at all.
Okay.
With the guardian cap on or the guardian cap off, there was no significant difference in dispersing the magnitude with the guardian cap per the data with the mouthpiece in.
Okay. So what can change the rates?
So here's where it gets further interesting to us, because when you read the headlines, USA Today, Yahoo Sports, ESPN, I don't know, name the company, but the headline is guardian cap reduces concussion rate. Players wearing guardian cap to reduce concussion rates. Again, Guardian is saying, we don't know if that happens. We're trying to look at, does it disperse impact forces? Are we a small piece of the puzzle? But the data, so the NFL mandated in 2022 that all players must wear the Guardian cap during training camp.
Mm-hmm.
And they followed that over the year of training camp. And they found in that year that the concussion rate was down 52% compared to the previous 3-year average.
Wow.
So looking at that from kind of a wider perspective, yeah, Guardian caps reduce concussion rate.
If that's the only thing that's changed.
If that's the only thing that's changed. And the truth is, that's not the only thing that's changed.
Mm-hmm.
The construction or manufacturing of helmets has changed significantly. I think we were first made aware of that as a general population. I think it was in last year, a couple of years ago, Devontae Adams, or was a Raiders receiver, may not have been Devontae, but they took a huge shot to the head, and the helmet kind of caved in and then back out. And you would think, like, if you didn't know it was a new helmet, you'd be like, oh my gosh, you see what just happened to that helmet? But it's being made, like, there's engineers that are working hours on this to figure out how do these forces get dispersed better where they don't go to the head or to the skull, that the helmet can take it and get rid of it. And so the helmet design has been incredibly advanced compared to what it used to be.
Right. I was just going to say, didn't like Patrick Mahomes, his helmet like broke after getting hit last year at one point, and they had to like switch the helmet? And
yeah, they had to switch the helmet. And granted, like, that was in a playoff game in like sub-zero temperatures and freezing water, or not freezing water, freezing conditions in which that happened. And there's a lot of, granted, the Chiefs won, which I was excited about because they wanted to win the Super Bowl. But should that game have been played, should have been delayed a little bit. Like, those conditions are
rough,
hard to play in. But the helmet engineering has come very far. The other thing that's come very far, and I'm going to stick with training camp and then kind of progress the conversation, is the rules in training camp have changed a lot over the years. Like, back in the 90s, 80s, 70s, anytime before that, training camp was like full contact all the time. Like, these players were crushing each other through training camp. And there wasn't a lot known about concussion at that time. So there's a lot of head impacts that were happening. Now in training camp, there's a whole process of building up to having pads on. And then there's a certain window in which you can have full contact. And then after that, there's a window in which most teams elect to not have any contact. Most teams through the NFL season, during the week, they're not having full contact practices, which is funny because, like, when I grew up playing, and granted, like, it's a much different level in youth sports compared to the NFL or college for that matter, but practices were full contact all the time.
Except maybe like Thursday, right?
In varsity football, the day before the game, uppers only. But like, other than that, most practices, every other practice other than that was full contact.
Wow.
And the NFL and a lot of college teams, like, they're not doing that anymore. They're like, you take enough contact in a game, we don't need to have more contact.
Right.
But the difference here is in youth sports, like, you need to have the contact to learn how to hit, how to take a hit.
And how to build up like tolerance.
And how to build up the tolerance for it. Where when you get to college and you get to the NFL, it's you have a pretty good idea of how to do these things. Or else you wouldn't be in those positions. So they need fundamentals, but they are tackling dummies instead of each other. They're blocking pads instead of going at each other and hitting each other in the face and the head over and over and over again. So the game, it's changed a lot. The contact in training camp has changed a lot. But one of the biggest changes that has helped has been the rule changes. And I know oftentimes we see a rule change and we get upset about it. They're making the game soft. It's not what it used to be. But the reality is that the rule changes have had the greatest impact on reducing head injuries. When they put in the rule of targeting, right? So targeting of a player leading with the crown of their helmet and hitting the other player in the head, or hitting a defenseless player in the head. When they put that rule in, it decreased the rate of concussion by 38%.
Wow.
But another way to look at this is when a targeting call happens and it's upheld, the increased risk of a concussion is 36.9 times greater during targeting than it is during a clean tackle.
How did they find that out?
So sports scientists, they go back and they retrospectively watch all the game films
Okay.
of when targeting happened, and then they look at the outcome.
Basically just tally if someone got a concussion.
Tally of
wow.
it. And if
okay.
if the call was upheld, because if the call isn't upheld, then it changes the data. But they found that when targeting was called and it was upheld, that there was an increased risk of 36.9 times compared to other plays in which targeting did not happen.
Jeez.
So that rule change, did it get rid of targeting? No, it still happens. Did it decrease it significantly? Yes. Has the game become safer because of that rule change? Yes. Has the concussion rate decreased because of that change in the rules? Yes. So that was a huge change. And then when we look at where do these things happen most often, talking with concussions, it's in training camp. It's in training camp during the preseason games. So them changing when you're allowed to have contact, how much contact can be had, that decreased it. And then this year, a lot of people still haven't gotten used to it yet, but the new kickoff rule. That's another area of the game that a lot of impact and significant injuries, like catastrophic injuries, were happening, both to the spine, both to the head, the skull, and concussion. So what do? They change that rule. So now they can't be at full speed crashing into each other.
Right.
They have this very short period of separation in which the contact is happening sooner, which means there's less velocity going into it. So these rule changes have been the things that have changed the rates the most and have made the games much safer. And I will point out to targeting, we talk about it in the book, the head impact research was very interesting years ago. Like we talked about the sensors being in the helmet and that the head impact didn't necessarily relate to a concussion. And there's data of players headbutting each other, very high impact forces, but it being in celebration. And with it being in celebration, how does that change my response to that situation? I score a touchdown. Brandy comes and headbutts me. It's in celebration. It's camaraderie. There's almost an expectation of this thing coming. So I'm able to kind of contract my neck muscles and lean into it. But the experience of that is a happy one.
Yeah.
It's a great one. And those can be really high head impact forces. Now, at the same time, a player going across the middle jumps up for a slant, catches the ball. They get whacked by a linebacker that they didn't know was there. And there might not be high impact force to the head, but they get a concussion. Well, the difference is that, one, psychologically, it's a difference of camaraderie and celebrating versus being attacked unknowingly. You might say, well, unknowingly, you're playing the game of football. You know a linebacker's going to be there. Well, you don't know you're about to get licked when you're going up for the ball.
It's different.
So the psychosocial component of that is I'm being attacked unknowingly. And in that, the neck isn't able to predict how it should contract to prevent that coup counter coup type of motion happening. So we can have very little head impact on a defenseless player and it can result in a concussion. We can have a very high impact on a player that knows it's coming from their own teammate in celebration and not have a concussion or a head injury. So I think when we look at targeting, like I'm a big fan of that rule. And that's the reason why is the research showing like how much that play is dangerous and can hurt someone. So it should be a penalty and it should be a player getting tossed from that game. Like there has to be a high repercussion in order for it to be carried out and for the players to respect that rule. But I do think there is something of, we want to disperse head impact forces, and maybe the Guardian cap was a way to try to do that, although the research isn't backing that right now. But the reality is like the biggest thing is protecting a defenseless player. And I think Tom Brady has a great take on this of at some point, the quarterback needs to be held responsible. Don't put your players in a defenseless position by throwing a ball in an area that you shouldn't throw it to. Like from a young age, I was a starting receiver and a backup quarterback. Like we learned, like slant across the middle, you have a very small window to get that ball in. And if you are late, do not throw it to your receiver. Because they're going to get lit up and you probably won't have that receiver anymore the rest of that game and maybe for a couple weeks after that. So like that used to be the training of young quarterbacks. Not just the plays, not just how to throw, when to throw, but but to protect the guys.
Yeah.
Where do you put the ball that gives your player the best shot to, one, catch the ball, but two, to be safe? Because as a receiver, you're running full speed. You're looking at the ball. You're not looking at, is the safety coming to me? Is the linebacker dropping back? Like, I have to catch the ball. That is my job. And the quarterback is supposed to be able to see those things. So at some point, some responsibility does have to go back to the quarterbacks of where are you putting the ball? Because if you put them in a defenseless position and they get whacked, like, to me, that's when the risk of concussion is the highest. When we look at the head impact data, that's very inconsistently consistent.
I know that you mentioned a lot of just like changes in the NFL in regards to ruling and things like that, but I feel like one of the current changes or agendas in the NFL is doing more international games and things like that. Like, we've seen London and Germany and was it Brazil this year and things like that. And so has there been like any injury, both with concussions, but just in general, do you know like any injuries that has that new change impacted the athletes in any way?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I had that bias that there's more games. There's Thursday night football, Sunday night, Monday night. Now some Thursday nights are doubleheaders. Some Monday nights are doubleheaders. Not the same team playing twice, but there's 2 games being played at that night.
And then isn't there random weeks that like there is a Friday? Like if it's like Christmas week or Thanksgiving, like there's also maybe a Friday game.
Yeah, and then it was after the college season, then the NFL would start playing on Saturdays.
Yeah.
Now the college season's been extended, so we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah.
But it used to be like back a while ago, it was like only Sunday. There was no Sunday night. There was no Monday night. There's no Thursday night.
Wow.
There's a profitability that happens in being in prime time that they learn from Sunday night football. Yeah. That they then learn from Monday night football. That then they said, hey, what if we do Thursday? We sneak Thursday on there, and they did color rushes, and now Amazon has it. Like, there's a lot of profitability that happens because if you're a football fan, it doesn't matter who the Thursday game is. You're tuning into it.
You're watching football.
Monday night, you're tuning into it. So there's a lot of profitability that happens in having these games. Now it's trying to extend out to Europe, to South America, to all these different places. And I thought, just looking at trends without looking at the research, just me as a viewer, going, wow, when they play more games and they travel more, there seems to be more injuries that happen. And research has actually looked at this and tracked, with more games, the longer season, more travel time, is there more injuries and is there more penalties? And I feel like, again, as a biased viewer at some points, of like, man, these Thursday night games, there's so much laundry on the field. Stop throwing the flags. Like, this is such a sloppy game. Like, they're still sloppy. The players aren't ready. They're not rested. And because they're not ready or rested, it's a sloppy game and there's more injuries. And so researchers looked at that and they followed it through a season, and they found that there was no difference. And they actually found, to my surprise, a decreased risk or a decreased rate of injuries in the Thursday night games. It wasn't major, but there was no difference in that. There was no difference in traveling to these different places.
That surprises me, to be honest.
And there was no difference in penalties.
Wow. Okay.
The only thing that they found was there was a relationship between how successful the team was and the decreased injuries that they had, which makes sense.
Yeah.
If more of your team's hurt, you're not going to have a successful season.
Right.
But that was the only pattern that they found in it. They didn't find one with Thursday night games, Monday night games, traveling.
But if your starters are out, then you're going to be
If your starters are out, you're not going to perform well.
Yeah, I feel like that's just obvious.
Yeah, they're like the teams that were hurt the most didn't perform great as the season went on. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense.
Sounds
but
about
like,
right.
Thanks for checking that box.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was surprised. I didn't think that was the case. I was kind of in this box that the NFL cares about money, and that's why they're doing Thursday night games. They don't care about the players. And the data doesn't show that. And I think if the data did show it, I do think the NFL would say, hey, we're not going to do Thursday night games. Whether it's the NFL saying that or the players union petitioning for that to happen, I do think changes would be made if there was data. And again, that was one research study, could have been biased. maybe.
Yeah.
But, as of right now, we have to say, like, no, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't impact it.
And there also needs to be a reality that, like, just because someone, like, there's a concussion protocol, but also, like, if you might get injured but not be on IR, right? So, like, I'd be curious about that study of, like, yeah, they may have tweaked something, like, who was it? Justin Herbert, early in the season, like, he has a high ankle sprain, but he's playing through it. So do they count that as an injury, or do they not count it as an injury because he's not on IR?
Right.
So I'd be curious about, like, those things, but I think Thursday Night Football is relatively new, right? And so I think we'll see more data over the years.
No, and that's one of the hardest things, I think, in concussion-based research is the reporting. Athletes know if I say that if I have a headache and I feel a little dizzy, or the lights are bothering my eyes, or it's too loud,
or if I puke
in the stadium, or if I puke, that, like, as providers, like, we have to diagnose that as a concussion. And as soon as that's diagnosed, you are in the concussion protocol. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Now, the NFL, they have the independent neuro consultant that also does the testing and things like that. But high school sports don't have that. Like, college sports, I don't think D1 sports have that. But I think, like, everyone is looking out for the health of the player. But to that, the player does have to be willing to report it, because it is, unless the player is knocked out, unless they stumble, unless they're puking, if they're not having light sensitivity or hearing sensitivity, they can still have a concussion. And the only way for us to know that is by them telling us that happened. I remember covering the state soccer championships in high school. It was freezing out. It was like end of November.
Oof.
It was
In New York?
so in New York. It was cold, and this girl got blasted in the face. A girl was trying to clear the ball, and it was just a line drive right to her face with a cold soccer ball, and she went down. And she wasn't necessarily knocked out on the field, or at least by the time, like, when I got to her eyes were open, but they were glossed over. Like, you could tell, like, her bell was rung, and that there is a concussion here. Right? It doesn't matter if it's mild or severe. This is a concussion. I'm so sorry. It's a state championship. Like, you're not going back in. But she was very eager to get back in the game, and very, like, she was fighting. She wanted to get back in. It's a state championship. She's a senior. I'm like, yes, like, that's awesome. I'm not affiliated with the team. I was the independent consultant for the whole tournament. And, it's every 5 minutes you're taught to go back and reevaluate. So I told her, like, hey, I'm not saying you're out for the rest of the game. You're out right now. And every 5 minutes, I'm going to come and reevaluate you. And if this changes within that reevaluation, we can talk about you going back in. Now, I knew she's not going back in. But to honor her and prevent the argument on the sideline, that's what we agreed on. Every 5 minutes, I'm going to reevaluate you. She failed every time. Like, miserably failed. But there wasn't, like, she was okay to be with her team. We didn't have to send her to the hospital. Like, there's enough saying that she's stable. She's not having a brain bleed. She's stable in this, but she's definitely not going back in. And at the end of the game, she came up to me and was with her parents, and I was like, oh no. I'm just about to take this on the chin. Like, I know I did the right thing, but I know that they may not see it through that lens. And it was a very moving moment for me in sports medicine. They came up to me, and the player shook my hand and said, thank you for not allowing me to go back in, despite me fighting it.
Wow.
I really appreciated that you came over every 5 minutes, reevaluated me, and at least gave me an opportunity instead of just, like, shutting me down. And she's like, I knew I was shut down. And I'm like, I knew you were too. But I just wanted to honor you as a person by redoing it every 5 minutes to see if you could go back in. And her parents shook my hand, and they were so thankful.
Wow.
They're like, thank you so much for looking after our daughter.
That's beautiful.
And making sure, one, that she's safe, right? Because, like, if there's there's like this upper motor neuron injury. Like, we got to send you to the hospital. Her team ended up winning.
Wow.
So she was able to be there with her team and receive the state championship trophy and medal.
That's cool.
And that's honestly, like, for any athlete, that's a very memorable moment. And the fact that, yes, she didn't return to play, but that we had staff that allowed her to be present to celebrate with her team, and that, like, made a world of difference.
Yeah.
So
wow.
There does have to be this side of the athlete having a willingness to report that this, and the way that happens is through education of, like, hey, there's some serious ramifications if we don't know that this is going on. And there are some tests that we can do to determine it, but also, like, we need to know how you're feeling.
Yeah,
we
they need to be
know
honest.
your report.
Yeah.
And I get it's a big moment, but, like, this is serious stuff. And like, the more that athletes are comfortable in reporting that, the better. And I think that's where the game has changed as well. It's like, you know, you're not soft or being called names if you get whacked in the head and say, like, I don't know if I can go. Where I think traditionally, before a lot was known, it was the, like, suck it up.
Yeah, well, you can play through. I mean, I played through a stress fracture twice. I've played through, like, ankle sprains and shoulder discomfort and things like that, but, like, you don't want to mess with the brain with concussions.
No, because it can be very serious. Like, it can turn very quickly if there's another impact onto the brain when it has not healed yet, and that's very, very serious.
So do you have a hope story?
Why don't you start? I'm gonna get a little sip of water.
All right. My hope story, we had people visiting recently, and it's just so simple, but it was so sweet. Dylan was outside playing football with a 56-year-old and his son, who is 9, and then Dylan, who's in his early 30s. And it was just so fun to watch, like, the generations of, like, this older man with his young son, but then Dylan being, like, in the in-between age of them. It was just, like, so special and awesome because you don't always see that. And this is, like, an older dad, right? Like, maybe when you're in your 30s, if you have a young son, like, you'll still play. But I feel like when you get into your 50s, like, that's when you start, unfortunately, that's when some people start slowing down and things like that. And so it was just, like, so refreshing to see him playing with his son, but then also Dylan, like, hopping in to play football with this family as well. So,
for reference, I was playing defense and was not wearing a guardian cap because we were playing flag.
Yes, there were flags involved.
And he put me in a blender.
Yeah.
He scored touchdowns and was grittying in the end zone.
Oh my goodness.
It was so much fun.
It was so sweet. The one play I remember watching, the dad threw him the ball and you went to, like, play defense, and he, like, did a spin move, and then he was like, and just, like, threw it back to his dad, and his dad was like, what are you doing? Like, I can't just throw it to you again. It was so funny.
Yeah, it was funny. He got stuck in the headlights. Like, oh gosh, what do I do? And toss it back. Oh my gosh. So my hope story is related to that. The same kid that we're playing football with is playing flag football, and his team is actually the Browns.
Yeah, go Brownies.
So he's got, like, the Browns jersey for the game, and he's a Bengals fan.
Yeah.
So it's so funny for him to wear the Browns jersey.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't want to wear this. I like the Bengals. But in the same time that they were visiting, we were able to watch the Bengals play. They had one of the night games. And he knows I'm a Chiefs fan. He's played Red Kingdom for me before walking in, and seeing all the Chiefs stuff around the house. But he didn't know that I had a Bengals jersey from AJ Green, receiver I used to love to watch back a while ago. And so the Monday night game, he's tuning in, and I just walked downstairs with my Bengals jersey on, and just watching his reaction, like his face of, like, oh, what?
It was awesome. It was so special.
Yeah.
I love it. So go football. If you would like, why don't you send us a DM of who your favorite team is? Because I think that'd be fun to know, like, who our listeners' favorite team is.
I'm going to assume it's all Chiefs listeners.
Yeah, of course. Maybe the Browns.
Maybe the Browns. You can like whoever you want to like. It's all fun.
It's all fun, but maybe not the Steelers.
But maybe not. Well, have a great week. And remember, every day is not just an opportunity to be hopeful, but an opportunity to become hope.
The Hope Not Know podcast is meant for educational, informational, and personal development purposes only and does not constitute any health or medical advice. If you're looking for specific advice, connect with us to work with a Hope coach. The Hope Not Know podcast shall not be liable or responsible for any loss or damage allegedly arising from any information or suggestions in this podcast.